Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we have a fun topic to cover the grounds of coffee and the impact of caffeine and how it actually works, the neuroscience behind it, and also if we have some other options in terms of mitigating poor sleep, which is usually what people are using caffeine for. So caffeine obviously comes in many different forms and through many different types of beverages. Coffee is probably the most popular, but a lot of times it's just become part of a traditional morning for many people, and they've never really considered why they're doing it or the benefits or potential negatives that it may have. So caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant. It's also a vasoconstrictor, which means that it constricts your blood vessels, which personally is one of the main reasons why I actually had to stop using caffeine several years ago. And I've never really missed it, but I do understand that it is a very basic staple item for many people. So I thought that it was important to sort of state where I am personally up front, just so that there's no confusion. Once caffeine comes into the bloodstream and crosses the blood-brain barrier, it acts primarily on the adenosine receptor in the brain. So what is adenosine? It is something that builds up in our brains throughout our day and creates feelings of tiredness over time as it continues to build. So for example, when you feel that sleepy, groggy, tired feeling, if you have the opportunity, you may go and take a nap and then you wake up and you might feel a little bit better afterwards because you have actually worn down some of that adenosine that has built up during the day. So in an ideal world, the adenosine would build up throughout the day just to the time where you're ready to go to sleep, and then it would make you tired enough to be able to get a really good night of sleep. Obviously, there are many variations and variables that actually negatively impact that from happening in that ideal way. So that adenosine is building up through the day, and caffeine, the molecular structure, is similar to adenosine, which allows it to bind to those receptors. But instead of activating them, it blocks them. And that prevents the adenosine from creating that feeling of tiredness or sleepiness and kind of tricks our brain into thinking that it's less tired. Now, with those adenosine receptors blocked, neurons are firing more rapidly, so there's an increase in brain activity, which can be interpreted by the pituitary gland, kind of like an emergency, like there's something happening. It causes the release of hormones telling the adrenal glands to produce adrenaline. So almost a little bit of an emergency crisis mode is happening, as if there's something going on that the body needs to prepare for, kind of getting hyped up. There's also a little bit of an increase in dopamine, which is associated with things like pleasure, motivation, reward. And so there's a level of satisfaction that people experience as well. And then norepinephrine, which has a role to play in the fight or flight response, is also triggered. So all of those pieces combine together that create the overall feelings and experiences that we have when we consume caffeine. So there's that reduction in tiredness that comes from the adenosine receptors being blocked. There's a little bit of that dopamine activation. There's a sense of increased alertness due to that higher adrenaline, higher norepinephrine, fight or flight mode, but that helps to also create some of that mental clarity that people like. Now, whether or not this is actually a good idea or sustainable for the long term is something that each person will have to determine for themselves. I also mentioned vasoconstriction, which is true of most stimulants, things like caffeine, nicotine. Some legal, some illegal substances have vasoconstrictive properties, which, as I mentioned, for me personally was I have a health issue that requires that I not do that. So I'm not able to consume things that are stimulants that constrict blood vessels. And that would be true for many people with many different types of health issues where blood vessel constriction and blood flow constriction would be a problem for them. If they need to increase blood flow, like if you have something that needs to heal, for example, and you need to have adequate blood flow to all regions, to your brain and to your body, then you may not want to be consuming vasoconstrictors. So the adenosine that accumulates in the brain throughout the day, when it's not impeded by caffeine, it binds to adenosine receptors, which over time slows down neural activity, making us feel more drowsy, more tired, and is really a part of our natural sleep-wake cycle, which is one of many reasons why it is not recommended to consume caffeine or stimulants at night in particular. So if you are going to have your coffee or your caffeine in some form, it's always better to have it early in the day so that your body has adequate time to process that out, and so that it doesn't have as much of an impact on your sleep-wake cycle and your adenosine. Now, the crash that can come when that caffeine does wear off can be connected to the effects building up, because while the caffeine is blocking that adenosine receptor, it's not actually stopping the production of adenosine. So adenosine is still accumulating there in the background anyway. It just isn't binding into those receptor sites. When the caffeine wears off, the crash comes, and that's why so many people feel more tired after their caffeine hit is wearing off. So very, very similar to the pathways that occur with most physical addiction. So being a former addiction therapist, I'm pretty familiar with some of the neuroscience around how those things work when receptors are being filled or blocked in some way. There's a cycle that's happening where the body's natural systems are being disrupted by the external force that's coming in, and sometimes can cause an accumulation effect that creates a bigger problem at the end when the drug wears off. And this is also why caffeine consumption may require an increase over time, just like so many drugs do, because the effect is less and less impactful over time. So I think there's an important distinction here between caffeine itself, the drug, the stimulant, and drinks like coffee or various other things that are typically associated with caffeine. Because there are options and opportunities to still consume your coffee if you enjoy the taste, and there are some other health benefits of coffee on its own without having that buildup, that addiction, and that crash that come from caffeine on its own. So coffee has shown to have some health benefits, actually, and I'm not going to get in depth here into like all of the studies around that, but there is material out there if you're interested. There are health benefits to coffee, and decaf coffee having some of those same health benefits without some of the negative consequences that come from the caffeine. So decaffeinated coffee is not completely caffeine free. It just has a much smaller amount of caffeine, usually 2 to 12 milligrams of caffeine compared to about 95 to 200 milligrams in a regular cup. But that reduced caffeine content means that you have less of an impact on those adenosine receptors, and then also the release of those stress hormones the way that regular caffeine does. So some of the other health benefits, there are antioxidants, there may be reduced risk of certain neurodegenerative disease. Again, there are studies out there. I'm not going to get into great depth there. There may be protection to other bodily systems and organs. There may be benefits to the gut and the microbiome. And using decaf as opposed to caffeine can certainly have a more beneficial impact on the sleep-wake cycle. If you are someone who struggles with anxiety, as I have usually been, you may also benefit from not consuming caffeine. Probably my only biggest complaint in regards to consuming decaf coffee as opposed to other options would be the variety of flavors. Now, there are some really wonderful decaf coffees out there, which I've been fortunate to encounter. But realistically, there are just never quite as many options. And so I'm very hopeful that some of these new things that are emerging will stimulate, no pun intended, industries to create more decaffeinated options for people who are interested in that. Now, some people may wonder, what do I do if I had a crappy night of sleep? Or if that's sort of a consistent part of your life experience where you are rarely getting enough sleep and feeling well rested when you're starting your day, what am I supposed to do if I'm not going to have my caffeine? So there are lots of things that can help to mitigate some of those mechanisms And there's a lot of sleep research out there, so if it is a subject that you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to kind of go down that rabbit hole. But there are other tools that we have that can assist us with some of these processes. It's also really, really important to be very clear that there isn't anything that is a replacement for good quality and adequate length of sleep. Whether you're talking about caffeine and other beverages or you're talking about a process that you're doing, good quality sleep is by far still going to be the best. But there are some moments where we wake up, we had a bad dream, or something happened, or we had a difficult night, or we're feeling anxious, and so we just didn't get enough sleep. We had to wake up extra early for something. So those things happen, and while a good night of sleep is always the best option, if that option didn't happen, what can we do instead? So some of the tools that I have used and I have found really effective, and so have a lot of people that I've worked with, are tools like yoga nidra and hypnosis. And the reason for that is multifold. On the one hand, some of these deep relaxation tools can help to place us in a deeply relaxed state that is the alpha or the theta brainwave state that actually mimics some aspects of good deep quality sleep. So for example, during hypnosis, in the theta brainwave, which is associated with deep relaxation and that transition between wakefulness and sleep, theta waves are also very prominent during REM sleep. And REM sleep is very, very important for cognitive function, memory, learning. And so by inducing a theta brainwave experience, hypnosis may actually help the brain to achieve some of those restorative benefits that are gotten typically during sleep. So sleep is still the best. But if sleep didn't happen for a variety of reasons, then utilizing a tool like hypnosis can help to provide some restorative benefits that can give you back some of what may have been lost. Yoga nidra is very similar in that aspect. It is a practice of systematic relaxation. In fMRI studies, it's shown that yoga nidra creates decreased activity in the default mode network, which is a network of brain regions that are active when we're at wakeful rest. With both, there's also a stress reduction and a reduction in cortisol, and cortisol being the body's primary stress hormone. So whereas when we have sleep deprivation, it typically elevates cortisol levels. And as we saw, caffeine can do that as well. But when we have those elevated stress levels as a result of a lack of sleep, it can become kind of cyclical where it just further disrupts our sleep patterns as we go. So lowering that stress, lowering those cortisol levels can help to break that cycle of stress and poor sleep, which overall creates better cognitive performance, overall well-being. Hypnosis and yoga nidra also help to increase parasympathetic activity, which can mitigate some of those effects of missed or lost sleep. And finally, through the practice of guided imagery, visualization, that mental viewing or rehearsal of various different things that can happen through visualization practices like yoga nidra and in hypnosis, those things can contribute greatly to neuroplasticity. And they have 2 out of the 3 important elements that contribute to neuroplasticity, the relaxation piece, as well as the repetition piece, particularly if you are using, say, a recorded hypnosis or a recorded yoga nidra and you are using them consistently over a period of time in a repetitive manner. You're getting the relaxation as well as the repetition. So with neuroplasticity, that is the brain's ability to create new learning, to build new pathways, to change habits, to create new beliefs and new behaviors. So if there is something that's happening that is contributing to poor sleep, like a bad habit late at night, for example, staying up too late watching TV, eating habits, all kinds of different habitual things, that neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, is greatly enhanced through tools like hypnosis and yoga nidra. So we may actually be able to use these tools to change the things that are creating the issue with the lack of sleep as well, depending, of course, on what's causing it. So mitigating some of the cognitive impact through having that deep rest and rejuvenation, as well as potentially changing behaviors and beliefs that are contributing to problematic habits and practices. So again, none of this is intended to replace good quality sleep, and that's true whether it's a practice or the caffeine that we talked about. But we do have other things at our disposal if you are starting to feel like, I'm not sure that I really want to continue with this pattern of using this caffeine every single day just to get through my day. There may be other options that could work for you. So I hope you found this to be interesting and illuminating. And if you are interested in dipping your toes in and trying hypnosis or yoga nidra, I do offer a very low cost membership where you have access to a collection of different hypnosis audios on a range of different topics, changing some of those behaviors that we talked about or uplifting your mood or your mindset. It's only $7 monthly. And for podcast listeners, there's a special opportunity to try your first month for only $1. And all of that information is available in the show notes. And until we connect the next time, I wish you a most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.